Welcome to Amazing Stories from the Hood. Stories loosely based on real life experiences. My name is Brian, and this is episode 4, entitled The House on Madison Street. Because it has become a source of pride for the typical American, you can often hear people talking about where they live. It represents, to a large extent, the level of success that they have achieved in life. And without a doubt, realtors sell the distinction between living in the good part of town, and it's the most commonly used selling point responsible for the sale of many a home to potential home owners. So on the flip side of living in the good part of town is living in the lesser desired location known as the hood. And if you live in the hood, it's always something that you're trying to make and save enough money to move out of. Even those who are reluctant to leave the hood say, "I live in the hood," and everybody instantly understands what that means. But rarely do you hear anyone talk about their actual street address or where they specifically live at. But this story is going to focus on just that, a specific location, the house on Madison Street. But before that, a little background, or a lesson in history, if you will. The Great Migration is the term that's used to describe what consisted of African Americans who came in large numbers. Records indicate anywhere from 300,000 to 400,000 people migrated to the northern states from the southern states to escape racial oppression, segregation, and violence. Also, to earn better wages, as the average income in the North for African Americans was 3 times greater than the average income for African Americans living in the South. The government would step in to assist the African Americans involved in the Great Migration and agreed to some extent to arrange for, or at least regulate, housing for these burgeoning African American communities. It was because the mass migration of Europeans to the U.S. was still underway itself that the government was put under considerable pressure to segregate the African Americans to satisfy the demands of the European immigrants, who were themselves only newly naturalized American citizens, and who, on the whole, refused to live around black people. Ultimately, the segregation that African Americans were migrating from in the South would follow them to the northern states as well. As the government was obligated to assist, the forms of housing provided to African Americans came largely in the form of high-rise structures in communities that became known as the projects, and to a lesser extent, row houses. These were buildings that were anywhere from 1 to 4 stories tall, built so closely together that they appeared to be in a row, hence the name row houses. This story focuses on the occupation of one such row house, the house on Madison Street. The house on Madison Street was a house that had 4 apartments in it, a 1-story structure with a centrally located front entrance and 2 apartments on either side of that entrance. As with all low-income housing, they find the cheapest land on which to build, and in this case, they built it on land that used to be in the possession of a huge, sprawling slaughterhouse. And by sprawling, we're talking about 4 entire city blocks. As slaughterhouses go, this was the location responsible for providing 50% of the meat to an entire geographical region of the United States. In the early 1900s, the regulation of slaughterhouses was almost non-existent as compared to today's standards. As a result of the Great Migration, this slaughterhouse would find that it was subject to policies that arranged for it to fall under the rules of eminent domain, and was forced to give up parcels of land to what the government officially recorded as condemned land. Because of the size of this slaughterhouse, the owners maintained considerable political clout. The slaughterhouse had been in operation for over 100 years at that time, and the owners thought that this clout was strong enough to warrant the slaughterhouse a waiver from the demands of the federal government under eminent domain, but they were wrong. So when forced to concede parcels of land that, under normal procedure, would be determined by government appraisers, the owners of the slaughterhouse were given the opportunity to choose what land was to fall under eminent domain. And the land they chose was a 25-acre parcel used by the slaughterhouse, which had been used for more than 100 years to dump the waste, blood, guts, and unused parts of the slaughtered animals. So the Madison Street row houses were built on land that had been used to dump biological waste for over 100 years. And because of this reason, land was indeed unique and a one-of-a-kind parcel that couldn't be found anywhere else in the United States. Now, turned into low-income housing for African Americans. Fortunately, as situations have a way of working themselves out, amongst the other things the African Americans migrated from in the South, sharecropping was a major factor. As you can imagine, one of the least performed acts by newly arriving African Americans from the South to the North would be farming. By large, the people who moved into these homes identified with pride as factory workers and wanted very little to do with farming on the land that they now lived on. But we all know that some habits do die hard because farming is, without a doubt, a cost-effective way to feed your family. And some residents did maintain small private gardens. Which brings us to the family that moved into apartment number 1 at the Madison Street location. They were the first family to arrive and move in, and the male head of the house was a strong, independent man who took little charity from anyone and inwardly struggled with taking government help in the form of housing, but realized the benefit was for his family and followed through with it. These and all the first occupants of the row houses on Madison Street were able to look across the street over acres of undeveloped land and see about 20 miles in the distance the entire cityscape and watch the sun slowly set behind the city every day. It was a beautiful sight to behold. And at night, they were witness to the sprawling, twinkling city lights. These views alone convinced the man that he had made the right choice for his family, and all notions of his pride were soon dispelled. In a short amount of time, as word spread, the Madison Street row houses were a much desired location to the African Americans migrating to the north. Unlike the homes they left behind, the Madison Street row houses had indoor bathrooms and running water and electricity, which hadn't been an option for them while living in the South. They also were provided access to public transportation, which a lot of areas could not provide at that time. So living on Madison Street, as it turned out, was a step up for a large number of reasons to the original families that relocated there. For the next 20 years, the row houses on Madison Street were the only structures that were built. Then, in the early 1950s, construction began on the opposite side of Madison Street, the construction of single-family homes, still, however, to be occupied solely by African American families. Families who, over the 20 years after the Great Migration, had worked and managed to save up enough money to buy a single-family home, and in fulfilling their quest for the American dream, acquired family property. So, on one side of the street, you've got people who had been there from the beginning, and on the other side of the street, you've got people who had come up in life, so to speak, through hard work and were able to buy a home. As you might imagine, class distinction quickly became a major social issue amongst the residents on opposite sides of the street. The first family to move onto Madison Street still lived there 20 years later, and was a family that consisted of the previously prideful father, his wife of an arranged marriage by both of their parents while living in the South, 2 boys, and a newborn baby girl. 18 months after moving in, however, they lost their little daughter under mysterious causes. But they had another child, another daughter, and by the time the new construction began across the street, she was 20 years old. The newly arriving family that moved into the single-family home directly across the street from the original Madison Street family was a large family who brought with them the husband's elderly mother, who they relocated from their hometown in the South after buying the single-family home. She would become the elder to the entire community on Madison Street, and she would spend a considerable amount of time every day just sitting on the front porch in her rocking chair, observing the community. She became a source of comfort to the entire community and was the sole reason the relationships between families on both sides of the street never deteriorated into classism as the conditions were set to foster. She mentored wives and husbands alike involved in inter-family disputes, because when people who were once poor now start making money, issues tend to arise between them, because money has a habit of changing people, no matter how long they've been married. The elderly woman watched out for all the children growing up in the neighborhood and was respected in the truest form as an elder. She knew about the family in apartment 1. She knew them well through conversations with the wife. She learned about their history and how they lost their daughter when they first moved in. She especially developed a fondness for the daughter, now 20, recently married and now pregnant. She was surprised and honored when their daughter asked her to be godmother to her soon-to-be-born child, which of course she accepted. But to the old woman, the realization that she was indeed the elder, the spiritual guide for all of these families, shocked her and caused her to withdraw from everyone, even her own family, for an entire week. She stayed in her room, barely eating anything, and not answering her door or allowing anyone to come in. When she did re-emerge, she had undergone a transformation. She appeared physically to be the same, but everyone could see also that she was different in ways that could not be explained with words. When the daughter of the original family moved in on Madison Street gave birth to a girl, everyone was so happy. The entire community on Madison Street came together and celebrated for days. So 18 months later, when the newborn daughter died, and the doctors at the hospital could not provide any answers as to why, it was the elder who was able to explain it. She called for all the residents to a meeting where she explained what had taken place. Afterwards, the community pooled their money and hired a lawyer to represent the girl and her family. The lawyer investigated their claim, took the slaughterhouse to court, and won a multi-million-dollar class action lawsuit against the owners of the slaughterhouse. All the families on both sides of Madison Street received a 6-figure check from the slaughterhouse owners. Come to find out, the elder, who grew up as a little slave girl on a sprawling cotton plantation in the South, daughter to the keepers of the big house on that plantation, and who herself lived in the big house with her parents during her entire years growing up on the plantation. She was witness to the repeated deaths at 18 months of many firstborn daughters of slave families who were forced to live in the parts of the plantation that were also used for dumping dead animals that had outgrown their usefulness on the plantation or had been hunted by the plantation owners or their friends and families. The residents of Madison Street took their money and all moved back to their hometowns in the South. And the myth in the southern black communities about moving up north and getting rich took hold like never before, and still exists to this very day. After the lawsuit, all the homes on Madison Street were demolished. 20 years later, in the 1970s, new construction of exclusive high-rise condominiums were completed, and they still exist there today, with the beautiful vista views and the exclusivity of living in the good part of town as prime selling points. The end. I hope you enjoyed this 4th installment of Amazing Stories from the Hood. If you did, please tell your friends. I got more coming. My plan is to release a new story every 2 weeks.